This is the Mooring Committee of the Harbor Management Commission meeting July 12th, 2022 at 5:30 p.m. in the second floor conference room at Sullivan Independence Hall. This is Jack Hirschler. Also attending, we have Brian LeClaire, Harbormaster by phone, Kim Taylor, Jeff Warren, Bill Perugini in the room. Any members of the public on the line? Okay. The first item on the agenda, Brian, is a Harbormaster report from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Brian LeClaire. We have two vacancies right now in the moorings field because of one gentleman was given a spot at the dock at Pequot, so he relinquished his helix. We moved a boat from the MW14 over to the helixes where it was a more appropriate location. We've offered MW14 to a new vessel which has accepted. He'll be submitting all the paperwork. We also have a vacancy at SW07. Mr. McMahon sold his house and is moving. We've made an offer on that to the next gentleman on the list with a suitable boat. There was a large sailboat at the top of the list, 43 feet, which is too big for the location, so this is more appropriate for a mid-sized power boat, which will be going there. So that offer is pending right now to him for his vessel. Other than that, everything is accounted for. We've been working on tracking all of the docked vessels on private docks as well as the Yacht Club docks. The Yacht Club provided all the documentation for their vessels for their members' vessels at their dock. We've also been in communication with a number of the private dock holders who have been providing information for their vessels on private docks. I'll be going out this weekend to do another inventory of boats in the harbor for those that are not in as of yet, because as you know, we've got that July 15th date coming. I've heard from two gentlemen that are having a little bit of problems with engines getting in, and they should be in within the next few days. They've been keeping me updated as to their carburetor and various boat dilemmas. We've also been working with Justin regarding the Yacht Yard dock. There were several vessels there, rowing vessels or small power vessels, dinghy-type vessels that were not registered. Specifically, there were two that were not registered that should have been registered. That's being corrected by the owners. There's also a boat that was too large that did not report the correct size to the town. They've ordered it removed from the dock. It is too big a dinghy. And there's another boat that has been apparently docking there where it should not be tying up to the Yacht Yard dock. Justin noticed it, and the owner's been located and warned about that. If it continues, I'll just have the boat removed if it's left there again. And there was one accident that occurred last week in the harbor, sailboat versus powerboat. The sailboat was an Ideal 18 under sail proceeding south. The powerboat was moored and not moving or occupied at the time. The sailboat, the sailor was distracted and basically rear-ended the powerboat. Unfortunately, the sailboat went between his two engines and bent some structural components of the boat. The gentleman operating the Ideal 18, and it was a Pequot Ideal 18, reported it immediately to the club. An official report was taken by the Fairfield PD. I went out there and inspected both vessels. Little, if any, damage on the Ideal. Unfortunately, the powerboat has more significant damage, but the club has already notified their insurance carrier, has reached out to the owner of the boat. I spoke to the owner of the powerboat. Everything is proceeding just fine right now. He's satisfied with the way it's proceeding for the repair of his vessel, and they're working on that. So no one injured, luckily, and it's being handled appropriately. So that is basically my report.
When I first heard about this, I was thinking that the sailboat was headed back into the harbor and they'd been out for a while and were distracted. Now I thought more about it and I realized that this boat was making way and underway for, 3 minutes? And when this thing occurred, they had just left the Pequot dock, right? This is
yes,
just like...
and
Partway up the harbor on the way in.
And the operator advised that he was distracted because a bald eagle came over the harbor and apparently circled, which caught his attention, looking up, watching the eagle, as opposed to where he was proceeding, and he's highly embarrassed that he was watching the bird and not where he was sailing when he hit the stationary vessel.
The old eagle.
The eagle has not been verified.
No other activity. Anybody else aware of anything else? Any questions for the harbor master? The next item on the agenda, we had mentioned last time that we need to follow up with Justin about the moorings at Perry Green, because these 9 moorings are administered by the Parks and Rec Department, and I believe that there are good arguments for transferring the remaining 9 moorings not currently administered by the Harbor Master and the Commission to the Harbor Master and the Commission. From looking at the deed from 1957 to the town for that property, the restriction just makes it clear that the moorings need to be managed by the Parks Department then existing or some other town entity. And so clearly the Harbor Management Commission could be that entity. I think the compelling reasons today are these 9 moorings are not the top of the Parks and Rec Department's priorities. And so when they get to them in terms of assigning them, the season's well underway. It's May, and people have made decisions for what they're doing for that year. And so it's tricky to find folks who are still unsure where they're going to put their boat for the season at that point. So it's not on our cycle where we would be assigning people, Brian, certainly by the end of February, and people would have good time to plan if we were doing the planning. And the other thing is that just accidentally, the scheme that's used by the Parks Department for fees is a per foot charge. Ours are a different structure with a range that fit into categories where everybody within that category has the same fee structure. So we've got different fee structures for 9 moorings and all the other moorings in the harbor. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So there's a timing issue, there's a fee consistency issue, and we now have online mooring, which would make it pretty easy for us to add 9 more moorings with a special waiting list rule under the terms of the deed. So we talked on June 26th to Justin about that. Brian and I were in a meeting. Jeff Stedman actually called into the meeting accidentally because he called me on my cell phone, so he contributed more information to us about what the deed from 1957 sort of looked like and what latitude we had to transfer that. And Justin's reaction at that time was, I think Brian, he was favorable with the idea of making that shift, but needed to talk to his manager, Anthony, about it, and that's where that sits right now. So we'll want to follow up. Brian and I talked a little bit about this afternoon. Maybe we should have Jeff help us with a letter that makes it more formal as a suggestion to Parks and Rec from the Commission to do this. Since it's now, we're not just relying on a follow-up from Justin. It might be more difficult without a letter from us.
So the deed actually, the deed doesn't say only Parks and Rec administer, it says Parks and Rec.
Yeah, I wish.
Because we didn't exist, the Commission didn't exist.
Right, I don't know if Jeff is on the phone yet, but it's pretty clear it could be or another town entity, and clearly we're in the business of managing lots of other moorings.
Right, in the same place.
Right, and so it's not like there's a deed-related issue that would be preventing this. So this is really just a matter of, it's always been this way, that it's been administered like this, and I think we should at least fully explore the possibility of aligning all these moorings in the harbor under one administrator.
So I guess my question is, how do people find out about the Perry Green moorings? Is that, are we gonna, if we take it over, do we cut off
a source? He didn't mention how he gets them. He's told me in the past when I've talked to him, Justin, about this, that it's difficult for him to find boaters that have boats that would fit within the 18-foot length limit that he's looking for, who are interested in being in Southport Harbor, tied up to Perry Green on their bow. So it's not so easy to find people, but he said he's had a wait list. I'm not sure how extensive it is.
It's up to 18 feet, is that how it works? Up to 18?
The deed says 20, if I remember correctly, but he's been limiting it, I think just because of the natural conditions there, it's really shallow, to 18-foot power boat.
Certainly would be a lot fairer if we administered it, because they'd be in the pool with everybody else.
Actually, they can't actually be in exactly the same pool. The deed actually has restrictions that make it clear that those moorings should be first priority to residents of Southport, and secondly to residents of town of Fairfield.
Really?
And they're not in the federal anchorage. Those moorings right up against the wall there, I don't believe those are in federal waters. So it would seem that the deed might carry, the restriction might carry. So Brian, when we talked about it, you had suggested that online mooring could support a secondary waiting list with a handful of people on it for those 9 moorings, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, it could do that. So we have, if it's true that they're not in the federal anchorage and that the deed rules would still have to be followed, then if the system is perfectly capable of keeping a track of a separate little group of people. Again, I don't think that list is very big. It's kind of a very small handful of people.
You would have to amend this rules and procedures thing to include those 9 moorings and explain.
Right, it currently says the rules and procedures refer to it as being administered by Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any other technical things we've missed last year when we did that, but yeah, that's a possibility.
Well, I don't know, we have to check and make sure there's nothing in the town code, Parks and Rec.
Yeah. Well, let's first see if they're receptive to the idea of it.
Yeah.
Consistency makes a lot of sense to me. This is not a hill for us to die on either,
Exactly.
This is one to follow up on. I just think that if we write a letter, we can get closure one way or the other on this.
Well, I would think if we met with Anthony, if Justin clears it with Anthony, then we sit down and describe, because I'm quite sure that, I mean, he's got so many things under his jurisdiction.
He
I
has
would think
hundreds of, I mean, Justin has hundreds of more slips to worry about.
Yeah. But, and I guess the only other thing to worry about is will the Army Corps of Engineers care? Because we don't want anything to impact the possibility of dredging.
Right, that's an issue that would be irrespective of who's administering the 9 moorings at this point, right? So yeah, that could put the kibosh on all of it.
It sure could.
Right. Yeah, I'm assuming from the meeting that happened a week and a half ago, where the very preliminary discussion that I attended with Jeff about the bulkhead repairs, that the town's not super concerned about the details of the deed at this point. The benches, the moorings, et cetera.
Yeah, I guess.
So,
but I don't want us to be caught in the crosshairs of, right? I mean, if somebody from the granting family decides that we're not doing the job the way they like it, the last thing we need is...
I agree.
Yeah.
I guess, seems like the first thing to do is find out if Parks and Rec has got an interest.
Yeah.
If they have an interest, then we can study these other issues and decide what our next steps would be.
We have...
Nobody's putting a gun to our head, but it would be nice to have the programming, if any, needs to be done by December, by online mooring, so going into next season, it's smoothly managed by the Harbormaster, if possible.
Yes.
Not a hill to die on.
No.
Okay. All right. Anybody have anything else for today for this group? The bulkhead update will be coming in our next harbor management.
You can report on that if
That was just a very preliminary meeting about the repairs to the bulkhead. So they're doing test holes. I don't know if you've been by the Perry Green, but they had equipment and like a little mini barge. Yeah, I was walking by this morning. So testing that has to be done in connection with the application to do the bulkhead repair.
Interesting.
They test the sediment?
The soil. It looked like the soil actually on the green itself, and it looked like they must have been doing something just at the wall itself, because they had a little barge there.
Yeah, he was pounding the thing into the soil to take like core samples.
Right, and I think they were doing on-land samples of the land itself, just to understand what we're dealing with there.
Yeah.
The steel in that bulkhead, they found stuff that looked pretty clearly that the steel that was holding up the stone behind it, in some parts of that bulkhead dated to the second decade of the 19th century,
Wow.
but the 20th century.
Wow.
So it had stamps on it, and the company's name, somebody said, went out of business in like 1921 or 22. So, and it had a 1909 patent pending on it. So somewhere between 1909 and 21 or 22. So the steel that's decomposing, holding up the stone that's there on that part of that bulkhead is over 100 years old.
I wonder if that's the case over in the lower wharf too. Or on those walls.
I don't know.
Interesting to, yeah.
Right. So, that they're in need.
Yeah.
So Brian, the one thing that we thought about while you were gone this weekend was that the police needed to have access to online mooring to find out,
They ended up going another route, but they would have benefited from
right?
it.
To find out whose boat it was that got hit.
That's a good point. Although they could have just called. I had the phone with me, and I had international service up in Canada.
They didn't want to bother you. They thought about that.
And I'd given the club, the folks at the club, my personal cell as well, in case they had trouble coming through on the town cell. But I told they should have bothered me. I was.
It's actually a good argument for the search for the deputy harbor master, because in a pinch that person.
Right. But they can run the registration just as easily off the boat, so it's not, they.
I think they
did
that.
Yeah. They didn't reach out. Pequot actually reached out, and I talked to them about it on Thursday. So.
Yeah.
Where were you, Brian?
I went on a cruise from Montreal to Boston.
Oh, excellent.
St. Lawrence.
Along the St. Lawrence through a number of towns. It was quite nice. Quite nice.
Do you have a Canadian accent now?
Eh?
Excellent.
You passed.
I've got the Canadian last name at least.
Yeah. Right. You become a Canadiens fan, then we'll really know. All right. I think that's it. Anybody from the public with any comments? I think we missed Pat today. He told me he was going to join us, so I'm disappointed to miss him today. Yeah. All right. If not, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Very
all right.
good.
Take care.
Thanks.
Good night.
Okay. Take care.